You know that feeling when you finally think you've outrun your ghosts, when you finally find a patch of quiet earth that feels like it might just be capable of absorbing all the heavy, suffocating grief you've been dragging around for years, only to wake up one crisp Tuesday morning to find a crew of absolute strangers driving cold, industrial steel spikes right through the heart of your newfound sanctuary? Yeah, that's exactly where my wife and I found ourselves, staring out the kitchen window of what was supposed to be our forever home, watching a paramilitary-style operation unfold right over the hydrangeas. Let me back up a little, because to understand the sheer, unadulterated madness of what happened, you have to understand what this house meant to us. My name is Arthur Pendleton, and my wife, Evelyn, and I had just relocated to the breathtaking, pine-scented foothills of Asheville, North Carolina, dropping our life savings into a sprawling, two-story colonial tucked away in a supposedly idyllic, sleepy neighborhood known as Cedar Ridge Estates. We weren't just moving for a change of scenery. No, we were running from a devastating personal tragedy that had nearly shattered our marriage into a million jagged little pieces, a loss so profound that we needed a complete geographic reset just to remember how to breathe without it hurting. Evelyn is a botanist, a woman who speaks to the earth and understands the quiet, patient language of roots and soil, and the crown jewel of this property was the massive, untamed backyard, heavily shaded by ancient weeping willows and towering maples, a blank canvas where she could dig her hands into the dirt and literally bring life back into our world. For the first few months, it was paradise, pure and simple, with Evelyn spending every waking hour mapping out raised vegetable beds and plotting the blooming cycles of perennial flowers, her face glowing with a genuine, unburdened joy I hadn't seen in years, while I, a retired corporate risk analyst who had spent 3 decades anticipating the worst-case scenarios for massive tech firms, finally felt the perpetual knot of anxiety in my chest begin to loosen. We knew there was a homeowners association, the Cedar Ridge Property Owners Association, or CRPOA, but honestly, I've always been a cynic who just assumed the worst they could do was hit us with a passive-aggressive fine if our grass grew an eighth of an inch past regulations, or maybe mandate that our front door had to be painted some incredibly depressing shade of beige. We signed the paperwork, paid the exorbitant monthly fees, and figured we'd just keep our heads down, smile at the neighbors, and be left entirely alone to heal in peace. Then came the morning the world tilted on its axis. I was standing at the kitchen island, nursing a bitter cup of black coffee, watching the morning mist burn off the Blue Ridge Mountains in the distance, when a low, guttural, earth-shaking rumble completely shattered the morning quiet, vibrating up through the hardwood floors and rattling the porcelain mugs in the cupboards. I stepped out onto the back patio, the chill autumn air biting at my skin, and there, tearing through the soft, dewy grass of our private, legally owned backyard, was a heavy-duty flatbed truck, disgorging a crew of grim-faced men in unmarked, dark gray utility uniforms who were already ripping deep, violent trenches into Evelyn's meticulously prepped soil. My initial, naive thought was that maybe a neighbor had hired a wildly incompetent landscaping company that had somehow crossed the property line, but as I sprinted across the lawn, my bare feet soaking wet, shouting at them to cut the engines, the reality of the situation hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing? You are trespassing on private property. I bellowed, my voice cracking with a sudden, spiking adrenaline, but the men barely even acknowledged my existence, their post-hole diggers tearing into the earth with a violent, rhythmic thud. Finally, a guy who looked like a bouncer at a rough dive bar, clutching a battered metal clipboard and wearing an expression of utter, chilling indifference, turned to me and stated, in a voice utterly devoid of human empathy, that they were installing a community defense barrier on the direct orders of the CRPOA, acting as if that string of bureaucratic nonsense somehow gave them the right to treat my sanctuary like a demilitarized zone. By the time Evelyn rushed out the back door, clutching her gardening trowel like a weapon, the crew had already unspooled 50 feet of heavy, military-grade chain link, topped not with decorative finials, but with thick, menacing, razor-sharp barbed wire that caught the morning sunlight in the most sinister way imaginable, slicing our beautiful, peaceful yard completely in half. It wasn't a fence, it was an occupation. I am not a violent man, But standing there, watching the color drain from my wife's face as the very literal manifestation of a prison wall was erected across the sanctuary she had poured her shattered soul into, I felt a dark, primal rage ignite in my blood, the kind of anger that makes your vision go tight and narrow. I stepped right into the foreman's personal space, demanding they stop immediately, or I'd have the local sheriff dragging them out in handcuffs. But the man just smirked, a cold, dead-eyed expression, and tossed a piece of paper at my chest, telling me I had until sundown to take it up with the board before they came back to finish the job. We spent the rest of that day in a state of manic, desperate confusion, burning up the phone lines, trying to get someone, anyone, at the CRPOA office to explain why our backyard was suddenly being prepped for the apocalypse, only to be met with a labyrinth of automated menus, disconnected lines, and finally, a fiercely rude receptionist who recited a clearly rehearsed script about a new community safety initiative designed to protect the residents from unspecified external vulnerabilities. When I pushed her, demanding to know what specific vulnerabilities required razor wire next to a bed of petunias, she sharply suggested I bring my insubordinate attitude to the next town hall and promptly hung up on me. That night, Evelyn and I stood on the back porch, wrapped in thick blankets, shivering not from the mountain air, but from the deeply unsettling realization that our safe haven had been breached, looking out at the glinting spikes of the incomplete fence that looked like a jagged scar across our lives. "Arthur, this isn't a zoning dispute," Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling, pointing a flashlight toward the base of one of the massive steel poles they had driven into the earth, where the beam illuminated a small, deeply engraved metallic logo that looked entirely too sophisticated for a local neighborhood association. It was the insignia of a company called Apex Vanguard Solutions, a name that sounded less like a suburban security detail and more like a shadow corporation you'd hire to suppress a rebellion in a war-torn country. My risk analyst brain, the part of me that had spent decades looking for the hidden variables in corporate takeovers, suddenly kicked into overdrive, connecting the dots of the secrecy, the military-grade hardware, the utter lack of communication, and the terrifying realization that this wasn't about keeping something out of our neighborhood, it was about boxing us in. And whoever was funding this nightmare had vastly underestimated the lengths a grieving, furious husband would go to protect his wife's peace. The very next morning, armed with a terrifying lack of sleep and a burning desire to burn the entire bureaucratic structure of this neighborhood to the ground, I bypassed the useless front desk completely and managed to track down the direct line for the CRPOA board director, a woman named Beatrice Vance, whose reputation around the community was a terrifying mix of a draconian school principal and a ruthless corporate liquidator. When she finally answered, her voice was completely devoid of inflection, a chillingly calm, practiced monotone that instantly made the hairs on the back of my neck stand at attention. I laid into her, demanding to know what gives her the unmitigated gall to authorize trespassing and property destruction without a single public hearing. But she just verbally sidestepped every accusation, calmly stating that the perimeter defense upgrades were legally binding, heavily classified for our own protection, and entirely within the completely unchecked powers granted to the board by the charter we had blindly signed. Classified. Beatrice, this is a cul-de-sac in the Carolinas, not a black site in Eastern Europe. I snapped, my hand gripping the phone so hard my knuckles were turning white. But she just gave a dry, condescending chuckle, warned me that interfering with an active Apex Vanguard Solutions deployment could result in severe financial and legal penalties, and abruptly terminated the call, leaving me listening to the dead air, my mind racing with the horrific realization that she wasn't just stalling, she was fiercely protecting a secret. I knew then that we were completely out of our depth, fighting a ghost in the machine, so I immediately called in the heavy artillery. Veronica Sterling, an old friend and one of the most notoriously aggressive real estate attorneys on the East Coast, a woman who chewed up corrupt landlords and spit them out before her morning espresso. While Veronica started digging through the opaque, heavily redacted financial records of the CRPOA, Evelyn and I decided to do a little reconnaissance of our own, knocking on the doors of our neighbors, the Callahans, an elderly, sweet couple who looked absolutely terrified the moment we brought up the fence. Mr. Callahan, nervously glancing over his shoulder as if the street lamps were bugged, quietly confessed that a few months ago, another neighbor had tried to petition against a sudden, massive hike in the association dues, and within weeks, their property was hit with thousands of dollars in fabricated code violations, their tires were slashed, and they were essentially forced to sell their home at a massive loss just to escape the relentless, targeted harassment. We were dealing with a cartel disguised as a neighborhood watch. The true depth of the horror, however, didn't reveal itself until a few nights later, around 2 a.m., when a strange, rhythmic clicking sound woke me from a fitful sleep, prompting me to grab a heavy mag light and slip out the back door, the cold grass slick under my boots. I crept toward the perimeter of the barbed wire monstrosity, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the suffocating darkness, and caught a shadowy figure crouched at the base of the fence, frantically splicing a thick bundle of optic cables into a concealed, weatherproof black box mounted to the steel. I shouted, charging forward, and the intruder bolted into the tree-line, leaving behind a heavy canvas tool bag and, crucially, a rolled-up set of highly detailed, laminated schematics stamped with the Apex Vanguard Solutions insignia. Sitting at the kitchen table under the harsh, fluorescent overhead lights, Evelyn and I unrolled the blueprints, our blood running absolutely cold as we realized what we were actually looking at, because this wasn't just a physical barrier to keep out stray deer or theoretical vandals. The schematics detailed a massive, interconnected array of biometric sensors, thermal imaging nodes, and localized signal jammers, a literal dragnet designed to monitor every single movement, every conversation, every digital footprint within the designated containment zone of our neighborhood, labeled chillingly as Phase 2, Total Environment Control. When I brought the documents to Veronica's sprawling downtown office the next day, she took one look at the intricate diagrams of the surveillance grid, took off her glasses, and rubbed her temples, her expression shifting from her usual combative confidence to genuine, deep-seated concern. "Arthur, Evelyn," she said, her voice dropping to a serious, hushed register. "This has absolutely nothing to do with community safety, because Apex Vanguard Solutions doesn't build fences for HOAs. They are a private intelligence contractor that specializes in hostile asset acquisition and psychological pressure campaigns. Someone with incredibly deep pockets is using this board as a puppet, turning your neighborhood into a digitized fishbowl, and they are gearing up to squeeze every single homeowner until you all break and run, abandoning your properties." The realization hit us like a freight train, the sheer, calculated malice of it all, and when we returned home that afternoon, our resolve hardening into a weaponized anger, we found a matte black, heavily tinted surveillance van parked directly across the street from our house, its engine idling low and quiet, a silent, menacing promise that the war had officially arrived on our doorstep. The intimidation tactics escalated with terrifying speed, morphing our quiet suburban life into a psychological thriller where we were the prey, starting with an unmarked, manila envelope shoved into our mailbox containing a single, typed sheet of paper that read, "Compliance is mandatory. Departures are inevitable. Cease your inquiries." A threat so brazen it actually made me laugh out loud, a harsh, humorless sound that echoed off the walls of our living room. They wanted us to feel isolated. They wanted us to feel the suffocating weight of an unseen enemy. But they had fundamentally miscalculated the resilience of a couple who had already survived the darkest depths of human sorrow. We had already lost the most important thing in the world to us. We were not about to let a bunch of corporate thugs wearing tactical gear steal our peace, our land, and our dignity. We realized that fighting them in the shadows was exactly what they wanted. So Evelyn, channeling all of her fierce, protective energy, decided we needed to drag these roaches out into the blinding, unforgiving light of public scrutiny, spending 3 sleepless nights compiling a massive, undeniable digital dossier of the blueprints, the photos of the illegal military-grade hardware, the threatening letters, and the audio recordings of my calls with Beatrice Vance, while Veronica prepared to drop a legal nuclear bomb on the city council. The tipping point came on a humid Thursday evening when a crew of heavily built Apex Vanguard Solutions operatives returned to our yard, attempting to install a massive, humming acoustic deterrent device on the fence line, acting with complete impunity until Evelyn and I marched out there, completely unbothered, with 2 cameras rolling. live streaming the entire trespassing incident to a local investigative journalist's social media page that Veronica had tipped off. The operatives, completely unnerved by our lack of fear and the sudden realization that their covert intimidation campaign was currently being broadcast to 10,000 local residents, hastily packed their gear and fled, but not before issuing a final, desperate warning that we were going to lose everything. They were wrong. The climactic showdown took place in the cramped, incredibly tense chambers of the Asheville City Council, a room packed to the absolute brim with angry neighbors we had secretly rallied, local news crews scenting blood in the water, and the immaculately dressed, incredibly arrogant legal team representing the CRPOA and Apex Vanguard Solutions, with Beatrice Vance sitting at the center table, looking perfectly composed, utterly confident that her web of corruption was impenetrable. The defense tried to spin their usual, nauseating rhetoric about unprecedented community safety initiatives and the legal autonomy of neighborhood boards, painting us as hysterical, non-compliant troublemakers. But they were completely unprepared for Veronica Sterling, who stood up, commanded the room with the presence of a battlefield general, and systematically dismantled their entire narrative piece by agonizing piece. She didn't just show the blueprints of the illegal surveillance grid. She dropped the ultimate kill shot, a leaked, heavily encrypted contract she had unearthed between Apex Vanguard Solutions and a massive, predatory commercial development firm, explicitly detailing a multi-million-dollar strategy to artificially plummet property values in Cedar Ridge estates through extreme, manufactured security distress, forcing residents to sell at rock-bottom prices so the developer could bulldoze our homes and build a luxury corporate retreat. The collective gasp in the room was deafening. The sheer, naked greed of the conspiracy laid completely bare for the world to see, and I watched, with a deep, profound sense of righteous satisfaction, as the arrogant smirk completely vanished from Beatrice Vance's face, replaced by the pale, wide-eyed terror of a woman who realizes she is about to face federal racketeering charges. The council, absolutely horrified by the brazen illegality of the operation, issued an emergency injunction on the spot, ordering the immediate dismantling of the fence, the seizure of all surveillance equipment, and launching a full-scale criminal investigation into the board's finances, effectively severing the head of the snake in one swift, brutal strike. In the weeks that followed, the sound of angle grinders and heavy machinery filled our backyard once again, but this time it was the sound of liberation, as city-contracted crews tore down the razor wire, ripped the steel posts from the earth, and hauled away the menacing black boxes that had tried to steal our peace. Evelyn and I spent the entire weekend out in the yard, our hands buried deep in the soil, repairing the torn earth, planting new, vibrant hydrangeas over the scars left by the trenches, the warm afternoon sun beating down on our backs, a silent, beautiful testament to our survival. Standing there, leaning against my shovel, looking at my wife, who was smiling, genuinely smiling, her spirit unbroken, I realized that true sanctuary isn't just something you buy with a mortgage. It's something you have to be willing to fight for, tooth and nail, against anyone who tries to take it from you. But as I sit here now, sipping coffee and looking out at the unbroken expanse of our beautiful yard, a lingering question haunts me. In a world where private corporations can hide behind the mundane bureaucracy of neighborhood boards to literally wage psychological warfare on regular people in their own homes, how do we ever truly know that our sanctuaries are safe? And when the law is written by the people with the deepest pockets, is righteous revenge the only real justice left?
And we are at the end of the videos. I hope you had a great time watching it. If you had any feedback or suggestion for the future videos, drop them in the comment below. And don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching and see you next time.